Thank you. Okay, folks, well, I'll introduce the panel. My name is Sean Beattie. I'm an historian, and I'm the editor of the Donegal Annual, and I live in the Inishowen Peninsula. Also on the panel, we have Mhairi Sutherland, John Bradley, John Hegarty, and if somebody else. Sharon Porter's with us as well. Sorry there, Sharon. Okay, and I'm going to begin by asking a few questions of the panel, and then the audience can interact as you wish after that. The first question I want to raise is, what is the overall impact? What, in your opinion, I'm asking the members of the panel, what is the overall impact, in your opinion, of the Ordnance Survey in Donegal and in Irish history? In other words, how relevant is it, and what is the impact of it, and how do you see it in the context of our history? We'll take it first.
Go ahead. Hello. Yeah. Well, it's just that from not really a study view of it, but just an overall view of the Ordnance Survey looked to me from the history side. Just after they'd finished with a survey in India, then they came to Ireland. It seemed to be just for a cash boost for the British Empire. They were here just to squeeze as much money out of the people as they possibly could. And when I read the survey letters and all, and the lists of stuff, I felt really angered, because Lancy was the man who did Desert Tigny, my home place here, and he commented on the houses of the people, how poor they were, how badly kept they were, how unhygienic they were. What did he expect? If the people improved their houses here, then immediately the landlord put up their rents. The windows were so small it barely let in light, and if they improved or enlarged the window, the rent immediately went up. Yes. Plus the fact that they were recovering from the plantation of Ulster, even at that stage, where the governor of Derry had removed what they called useless swordsmen from Inishowen. They had collected 6,000 young men from Inishowen. Inishowen's not big. To take 6,000 young men out of it, put them on a ship in Derry, and transport them to the army of Russia in 1609. A place takes a long time to recover from that, but these people to sit down and say, oh, look how untidy they were, how they hadn't whitewashed their walls of their houses even. Because if they whitewashed the walls of the houses, then the landlord would have put up the rent immediately. So, sorry, but I'm a bit angry about that, and that is what I think the whole thing was about, was just squeezing more money out of the Irish people. Thank you.
Okay, Mhairi.
Okay. Not with the depth of local knowledge that you'd have, John, but a similar, slightly adverse line to ask, as well as what we've gained through the Ordnance Survey, what was erased by that process. As John says, it was a colonial experiment, as many colonial experiments of appropriation were taking place. Photography was also a process of classification. So for that to happen, a certain amount of embodied and local and lived knowledge was erased in that process. In the Ordnance Survey of Ireland, the most notable, I suppose, were the anglicisation of local place names. So I think in this kind of bicentennial year, it's important to think what can be kind of reclaimed from that, what diversity of experience and local, historic, decade, century-long knowledge can be brought to bear on the kind of what's regarded as the not so much the triumph of the Ordnance Survey, but it's hard not to be bedazzled by all the innovations, the kind of new machinery, instruments, all the kind of innovations. But it's important not to be overwhelmed by that and to realise that a mapping is not the land. It's a schematic laid over the land. And the land and the people that live in it were affected by the original Ordnance Survey, but we're here now in a contemporary sense. There's contemporary experience and knowledge that can be brought to kind of bear on that and to make something like, use the opportunity of the bicentennial of the Ordnance Survey to listen to kind of multiple voices. And I think the work that Karen's doing, the work that I've done with mapping monuments, artistic voices, Brian Friel Translations is a wonderful play, but it can't be the only cultural demonstration. It can't be the only kind of cultural response. The Ordnance Survey of Ireland changed its name to Tailteann Éireann in 2023, neatly avoiding being called the Ordnance Survey of Ireland in the bicentennial 2024 year. So it's interesting. I think it's a contested area. It's not just this wonderful mapping project that allows us to kind of GPS our way around the county, around the country. It's something that should reflect the kind of experiences and histories that John has kind of mentioned, and in a contemporary sense.
Okay, thank you, Mhairi. I think we're looking at the broader context, and on that respect, I'll move on to Sean. Do you want to comment?
Well, I suppose my perspective is from a long-term hill walker and walking guide. And when I first started hill walking a good few years ago, we used the half-inch map, which were not great, to put it mildly. There were often cliffs missing here and there. And when we moved into the Ordnance, the 1 to 25,000 OS Discovery series, they were quite an innovation. And, they've gotten us out of quite a few rough spots. And so my perspective is very much as a hill walker, going exploring, mapping has been invaluable. But also, they don't show you what the ground is like underneath. You're looking at it from a different perspective. That's where the local knowledge is very important. There's also things that are still not mapped very well. So from that point of view, it allows us to combine our own sense of place, and also to improve our understanding of mapping from a top-down approach as well. I've struggled with many contours over the years, trying to get up them, trying to find them.
Thanks very much, Sharon. That's from on the ground level, from the experience of walking on the ground, which is very important. John, your comment?
Yeah, well, I've been involved with the mechanics of surveying, being a surveyor all my life. So my interest in the history side of things is only relatively recent. But I mean, as I start to read into it, you can see, I mean, in everything there's two sides to it. There's benefits to be gained from the imperial past. I mean, if you look at what's happening with Russia and the imperial conquest that they're into at the moment, I mean, it's essentially no different from what actually happened here. But there was also benefits from it too, because the development of the infrastructure of the country had to occur. But as well as that, regardless of what the past is, we have to own both parts of it. It's now our history, whether we like it or not. As you say, Tailteann they've changed the name of the Ordnance Survey, so I mean, it's a change of direction. So we're owning our own past, so that's the way I would see it anyway. Okay,
thank you. So mixed views on that. I just want to, Brian Friel was quite critical in his introduction to the letters. Brian said, he said, and there are blatant errors, the blatant errors of the amateur. He's talking about the Ordnance Survey. He said, after O'Donovan visited the old church in Fawn on the 26th of August, he wrote, I could see nothing in the churchyard that belonged to the time of Mura, but 2 odd stones exhibiting rude ornaments and representations of the crucifixion. That's a quotation. And then Brian continues, he says, one of these owl stones is the superb St. Muir's cross, which archaeologists consider to be one of the finest early Christian steles in the country. That's Brian Friel. Well, we all know that Brian is very, very critical, but I think he's right there on that particular point, that they undervalued and didn't recognise. And it's amazing that John O'Donovan made that mistake, because he spotted so many other things. Yes, and then there's another reference here in the introduction in which Seamus Dean criticises the Ordnance Survey. He talks about how they pitted the foreigner against the native. And elsewhere, Brian Friel points out, though, that John O'Donovan, who was in charge of the place names, was working here at the same time as Thomas Moore was writing his melodies. So he sees the two as sort of interconnected, Moore's melodies and the Ordnance Survey as well. That's a kind of connection that we wouldn't normally make. I want just now to move on to another question, and I'd like to ask the panel, how successful do they think that the place names section was? Now, the place names are actually very, very important, because in the introduction to the letters, we are told that John O'Donovan was employed specifically for the purpose of obtaining place names, the ancient names and the Hibernicized names as well, and also the spellings and any other history associated with the place names. So apart from the mapping end of it, the place names are a totally different matter and totally, a really vitally important part. So I'd like to ask, what does the panel think of how the Ordnance Survey handled the place names? Did they get them right? Did they mix them up? Burnfoot being an example. Did they destroy place names? Brian Friel brings this up in translation. So were they destroying place names? Did they ignore place names? Or the place names that haven't been recorded? That type of thing.
Yeah, mostly the place names were recorded well. I think they took them just phonetically from the locals. They made mistakes, and there was mistakes. One of the mistakes that I noticed first when I was young was a place called Drumhaggard. It's a range, a ridge from Muff over to Bridgend. And I always wondered, Drum is the Gaelic for a ridge, and Haggard as the English for a hay barn. So I was wondering, like, an Irish name and an English name stuck together, it didn't make sense. But when I looked at the 1611-1661 map of Holler Parsons, the ridge wasn't Drumhaggard, it was Drumhaggardy, my family's name. That is where we originated. So they made a mistake there, and I was very glad to see that that was the case of it. Also, the place name of the Swilly, it is written up there that, and they said that it was the lake of the Eyes, Suli. But it actually is known that it is the god Suli. The god Suli was a Celtic god that the Celts took with them from Anatolia and Turkey. They took her with them all the way across Greece and into Europe and to the two islands. Every place, she was a goddess of watery places. And as they took her across Europe, they would place her in a place where there was water. And she was represented like a peacock type of thing with 600 eyes on her tail. And that was the goddess Suli, or the eye god. The other place that she was installed was at a place called Tubber Suli down in Dorset or Cornwall, a place that is now called Bath, where all the water things are. And the next place they placed her was at up near Anglesey, the holy island of Anglesey on the coast of Wales. There's a piece of water between Anglesey and the mainland of Wales, and that has the word Suli in it too. And the next place they took her to was to this fjord here, and they placed her there. And we are very lucky here because there's two rocks at the mouth of the Swilly, and it's Swilly Moor and Swilly Big Swilly and Wee Swilly. And our saint here, local saint, St. Columkill, actually wrestled her and eventually drowned her, and Christianity took over. So that was the word of Swilly.
Okay. Mhairi, what do you think?
I think when you're dealing obviously with two languages anywhere, there's going to be a certain amount of kind of slippage and that kind of Hibernian kind of Irish. But certainly it contributed, it was another kind of push down of the Gaelic language when the primacy of the anglicised forms. And as John really speaks eloquently about all those different interpretations, all over the place. My grandfather was born in a townland called Loch Salt, which implies a big saline lake. It's not. It's Loch Agus Alt, which means
probably
cliff.
was an old Irish name for that as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, which means cliff and deep water, but not a saline body of water. So there's all those kind of slippages, but ultimately it has certainly confirmed, in contrary to the Irish being declared the first language of the state, the anglicisation of areas outside of the Gaeltacht.
Yeah, it's strange they did make mistakes because John O'Donovan claimed to be an authority on Latin and Irish, but he does mention elsewhere that he wasn't really, a native Irish speaker. Can I move on to Sharon, please?
Yeah, I mean, similar to that, there is some confusion. I think one of the kind of well-known ones in Donegal is the Poison Glen, similar to that.
That's right, yeah.
Is it the Heavenly Glen or the Poison Glen?
Never.
Confusion. And then, similar to John was reading the log, the surveyor's log, I want to ask John a question about, they have desert tegony called desert agus. They're sent agus rather than agony, and I just wanted to get your interpretation on that, John, which you think is correct.
Well, the saint, it was G-shirt was a word that belonged to the Coptic religion that came to Europe from North Africa, from Syria and Egypt and those regions. The Coptic monks came up on the ships that were coming to Land's End to collect stuff to make tin, and they also came to Cork to collect copra or copper. But the monks summed a lift up with them, and they spread the religion in these two islands, on Ireland especially, maybe 150 years before St. Patrick came here. But when St. Patrick came then, the Coptic religion, which resembled a type of Celtic religion that held a lot of the old Celtic style stuff in it, the early Christians with St. Patrick wanted to get rid of it and destroy it. So the G-shirt, G-shirt was a place where the Coptic monks went. They always wanted to go to very isolated places to be closer to God and away from temptation and women. And so they would go to a place that was way out in the country type of thing, and a place usually where there was a store of fish, and it was in here in the river. The first church, we think, was the one that we were talking about here at Dunree that we've been digging about and we've been trying to report on. That they had they lived off the salmon. They would salt the salmon and have something to eat, but they stayed away in a very lonely place. So the G-shirt Agni was the name that they gave this place because Agni came here. And the strange thing about it is Agni has an association with salmon too, for some, maybe the salmon of knowledge or something. But it has and as well, there's a holy well to him out at Mamore Gap, which was his feast day as I think it's the 6th of June, but now they've changed it to the 15th of August, and it's a devotion to Our Lady. but that was where he went for complete isolation out into the mountains. So that is Desert Agni.
Okay, thank you, John.
Yeah, I don't really have much to say on the matter. I'm not an Irish speaker, so I don't know. But I think if John O'Donovan was alive today, I'd be only too glad to talk to John here, because I think, in fairness to John O'Donovan and his time and what the job he had to do, he was trying the best he could with what he had. And I mean, Larkham tried to learn the Irish language, and through his hat at it, he realised it was out of his depth.
Yeah.
And I mean, given the job that they did, he worked under very, very difficult circumstances, trodden the length and breadth of this country in very poor conditions, living in quite difficult circumstances himself. And I'm sure that he probably had doses of pneumonia or whatever during his trips. So, but you know, I'd say they were doing the best they could for the time that it was in it.
Yeah, yeah. There is always, and there still is, conflict about place names. You know, people argue about it. Like, for example, in Dingle, it's Dingle ni Hoosh, and there's rows about what exactly it means. I want to just want to point out something that we discussed earlier. We discussed this earlier about what is the relationship between the sappers and the local people, and I just happen to know that in Inishowen, that in the 1850s, 1820s and 30s, the relationship was dire between the army and the local people, and the reason for this was poitín making, because Clonmany was the Poitín Republic of Ireland, and the government had passed an act called the Townland Fining System, and under the Townland Fining System, if a still or a piece of a still, even a piece of a still, was found in a townland, the whole townland was fined. And when the townland was fined, people couldn't pay, and if they couldn't pay, they came in, the army came in, and they just took cattle, livestock and everything in the entire townland, whether you were guilty or not. Now, I needn't explain what kind of injustice that led to. Consequently, we had people like the Reverend Edward Chichester giving out stink about this behaviour. We had the landlords like the Harts and the Harveys giving out, complaining about this kind of treatment of local people. So that's a kind of a context, that's the social context that the Ordnance Survey was working in, And it also struck me when I saw the photographs there of the men in uniform. They look identical like the uniform of the revenue officers who were sent in to collect the fines. They look quite identical. So there is this, it's a very difficult period for them working in here. However, there is one instance where the writer Charles McLinchy, who wrote the book, his memoirs are in The Last of the Name in Clonmany, and he has a story about how on one occasion people used to steal the equipment that you see around here belonging to the sappers and the Ordnance Survey people. And but in that particular instance, he talks about the things being recovered and being given back to the people, given back to the Ordnance Survey. So there are just a few examples of things you can further explore. Like today, we actually talked about the very technical side of it, but like there's a whole social side of it, of these people working in this context, in this particular area. And of course, I should say that Donegal was the worst area in the country for making poitín, had the largest number of fines. So we're kind of unique up here.
The best in the country, Sean, rather than the worst.
Well, best in the country, exactly. Okay, I want to just read a little bit here again from what Brian Friel said. He said, we have but a partial he calls it partial and unsatisfactory. He said, writing from Dante's on October 16th, O'Donovan throws discrimination to the winds and engages in wild generalizations, perhaps because he was in great pain from a sprained ankle. And he quotes from O'Donovan. O'Donovan says, the ancient families here can yet be distinguished by their forms and features. No offence intended here now. The O'Donnells are corpulent and heavy, but with manly faces and aquiline noses. The O'Boyles are ruddy and stout, pictures of health and well fed. The McDevitts are tall and slender, with red visages. The O'Dohertys are stout and chieftain-like, stiff, unbending, stubborn, much degenerated in their present state, but all have good faces. The McSweeneys are spirited and tall, but of pale and red colour, and of them all, the O'Boyles and O'Dohertys are by far the finest human animals. That's his description.
No sweeping stereotypes.
That's Brian Frale's quotation there. I just want to ask another question from the panel, and that is, how useful do you think the memoirs are? Like here we have the letters. This book here is the letters written by Dr. John Donovan. These are the letters here. And then separately then we have the memoirs. So I presume you're all familiar with the memoirs? Yeah. Oh, okay. So are you happy to answer that question? How useful do you think the memoirs are as a record of the 1820s? Now, you probably need to have this in your hand to be able to answer that question, but does anybody care to take up that one?
Perhaps I would just like to say I don't know them in detail,
Okay, fair
but
enough,
through the Mapping Monuments project and the research that
yeah.
I've done at Trinity, obviously I kind of know what the memoirs are. If everyone knows what they are, they accompanied the mapping of the land, and they were the kind of tally of the customs and places and people in each kind of townland in great detail, and the industries and ways of life and sustenance and all the rest. But it was interesting, I think, that there was only one published during the lifetime of the Ordnance Survey, which was of the parish of Templemore,
Derry.
and County Liberties of Londonderry. And it was it was a heavy, big document, and it was kind of widely acclaimed for its detail and painstaking kind of effort that went into it. But even though there was a call for the rest of them, because the rest of the material had started to be gathered, it wasn't gathered as in detail as it had done up here in Ulster as it goes down towards the south of Ireland. But that process was ongoing, but that was stopped after the publication of the first memoir. Because for various reasons, but I think Spring Rice actually mentioned that if there's any more of the kind of history in detail of Ireland produced, it's going to cause civil unrest. So best not bother, publishing the rest of them. So I think that was quite interesting. It was a political intervention about the perhaps insurgents that it might provoke if full kind of detail of that was kind of released to the people. But it has been published in the 1990s, isn't it, by the IRR? I've done made this mistake before. The RIA.
Royal Irish Academy?
Yes.
Right, okay.
The Royal Irish Academy.
Right, okay.
Always getting it mixed up.
Yeah, right, okay.
But they've then subsequently published all the rest of the memoirs and the drawings as well. But yes, I think it's interesting that the publication of the rest of them was stopped after the first publication.
Yeah, I think the reason was that it was a
Of
question of
expense.
finance
Expense
couldn't
as well.
afford it yet.
Yeah, expensive.
So, John?
Well, I found it very interesting and very, very helpful to see the list of things that they'd done on the farming, sea fishing, shellfish and stuff. Although my father was a soldier here in Dunree, but my mother's people were from out at Mamore Gap. There were sheep farmers out in Jackson's Glen. My mother's people were Jackson. And even when we were going to school, or when we finished when we were school holidays, we were taken to the beach every spring tide, and we gathered shellfish, periwinkles, mussels, oysters, and seaweed. I know what seaweed is, people call it sea vegetables, but we gathered a lot of dulse and carrigan moss and vegetables like that. And they were taken home and dried and stored and cooked. And they were part of our traditions of my mother's people. They were actually lived out at Mamore Gap, but each family had a certain place along the shore to go. And because the Jacksons were newcomers out at Mamore Gap, they had to travel over Lee Derrick Mountain, a group of them that gather a group every spring tide, and down the far side into Port Shunny, or the Foxes Port, which is a very isolated place, but nobody was going in there, so that was the place they went. But they still went every springtide and gathered their shellfish and their seaweeds. Also, the farming, the salmon fishing too was described in it, and that was very important to us. I ended up fishing salmon myself when I was young, and we had our own boat. But it shows you, but again, there was salmon nets allowed all along the Swilly shore. We are very lucky here with these sandy beaches where they could put a net and the salmon would come in out from the mid-current and they'd catch them in the nets. But the landlords, again, they claimed ownership of those nets and they claimed ownership of the salmon, although they hired a couple of locals to gather the salmon out of them. They took the whole thing away. They didn't get any of the salmon. But and also they described the farming too, and the animals, the horses, donkeys, all the stuff that they had there, which was very, very valuable, I think, in a way, to show what type of life they had. But it's changed completely now. But even when I was young, you could still see the resemblance to that type of lifestyle, even when I was just a child.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, just kind of following on from what John was saying about the land, it was 1/3 was considered agricultural value, with the other 2/3 being considered waste and bog. I kind of wonder what they meant by waste. The other thing that struck me as well is there was an abundance of wildlife, with a lot of foxes with white bands around their necks living in the rocks down at the shore, which would have been quite a sight. And things like eagles. There was a huge abundance of fish as well. But another interesting thing as well was that seaweed was used a lot to fertilise the land, particularly for potato growing, because lime was not accessible because it was located in Carn, which was considered, they had no means of getting it from Carn. But they reckoned that some types of fish were getting harder to catch, and the locals thought that was because too much seaweed was being removed. So I thought that was quite interesting, and has parallels with today and sustainability issues. And also another striking feature was the lack of trees. Because when somebody said a tree, it was basically cut down. Harvey had some trees around his house at Linsford, but there was a huge reliance on turf. And also for the 6 blacksmiths that lived in Desert Tegney at the time, they were all fueled by turf, which was quite interesting.
Thank you. John?
I really have no knowledge of I couldn't comment on the context of the social or history at the time, but I do know that it was a burden on the soldiers to gather this information, and they weren't too happy about actually gathering it. So I'm not quite sure of how accurate it was and how much attention they actually paid to it.
Yeah, they had a difficult job to do, of course.
Pardon?
They had a difficult job to do when they went into strange.
Well, they had a very long day's work, and then they had to come back and start working on that kind of stuff. So I'm not sure how diligent they were in actually doing that.
I'll just read one little bit before we finish from about Desert Tegney. What it said here, it said, they live in low stone cabins with glass windows and thatched roofs bound down with straw ropes. Very few are whitewashed, and there is no lime nearer than Carn, as you said. The cabins consist of 1, 2 or 3 rooms. They are not clean or comfortable. The English language is increasing. The food of the people is potatoes, water, milk, and some meal. Most people keep a cow and all burn turf and a little bogwood. They live about from 60 to 80, and are about 6 in a family. They marry very early, frequently at 16, and in one instance, in the memory of one man, the united ages of one couple did not exceed 28. That's just from the memoirs. So final question, how relevant are the memoirs for us today? I'll start with you, John, on the far side, if you don't mind. How relevant are the memoirs for us today?
Well, I think any documentation of history is useful to us. It gives us a starting point for further study. So, yeah, I mean, that's as much of an opinion I would have on them. I haven't read them extensively, and I haven't read the context of them, so
Yeah.
I can't comment really.
Okay, that's fine. Sharon?
I think from a cultural heritage point of view, but I also think as well, I had a couple of days with Karen where we kind of went up a few mountains, particularly the Ors Hills, looking for the line of sight cairns. It's not directly related to the memoirs, but that was really intriguing because as a hill walker, anybody that visits the mountains, when you see a cairn, you know, a pile of stones, you assume it's to stop somebody from going the wrong way or falling off a cliff. But the fact that these were the original piles of stones, you know, to some extent, that were used to develop mapping, early mapping, was really fascinating. And in Sleeve Snacked as well, we also investigated the old encampments and we found your buildings, what was left of them. And that was intriguing. And again, as a local person, I will look at a pile of stones, a cairn, in a completely different way after that experience. So thank you, Karen, for bringing that knowledge with you.
Okay, John? Please.
I found it very, very helpful, and I gained a lot of knowledge from it, and it was very worthwhile. There's no doubt about it, except for those instances where they commented on the hygiene of the people here. And there was one other big fault that I found in it was John O'Donovan went to find a battlefield, a battle that was fought here in 1557 between the O'Neills and the O'Donnells. And it was called the Battle of Binion. It was written about in history by Philip O'Sullivan Bear, who wrote about it in 1621 in Portugal. It was written in Latin, and they described the battle and where it was fought and the countryside around it and everything about it. And it was fought it was called the Battle of Binion. But when O'Donovan, he came here, he found that there was 3 binions in Inishowen. There's a binion in Clonmany, there's a binion out at the Meanches, out at the back there, and there's a binion in Raphoe. So he said the first thing that he was going to do when he came to Inishowen was find out where this battle was, because there was 3 binions and nobody knew exactly where it was. So he looked at Clonmany and he found out that it couldn't be fought there. It was too steep and you couldn't. It was fought over 2,000 head of cattle, and the 2,000 head of cattle were preserved near the battlefield where the O'Donnells and the Dohertys were defending them. It was over rent for Inishowen because the O'Neills owned Inishowen and the McLaughlins, but the Dohertys rented it off them for 200 head of cattle a year, and they never paid it for 100 years. So they came down, and the battle was fought, and it was described, and everything was described about it. And he looked at the Meanches and he said it couldn't be here because it didn't suit the description of Philip O'Sullivan Bear. So we went to Raphoe, the next place, the next binion. Binion actually means a hill that incorporated a small cliff. And he went to Binion, and he says when he got to the Binion Raphoe, it was raining very heavily because the civil servants that time didn't have cars, and the expenses, the big expenses, he had to walk all around. And he looked up at the hill and he spoke to one of the locals, and the local asked him what was up on the top of that hill there, what it was, and the local explained to him, and he said he decided there and then that this is where the battle was fought at Raphoe. But in 2000, when this book came out, the Ordnance Survey letters, whatever, I read it, and immediately when I read the Philip O'Sullivan's Bear description of the battle, I knew immediately that it was in the Meanches, because I had been born out near the park in the Meanches, which is a big enclosure, ancient enclosure that Philip O'Sullivan Bear mentioned, but it had been grown over by the peat bogs. But I knew it was there because we had gathered sheep in it, and I knew everything about it. So I'm now at the minute going to write up the correct version of the Battle of Binion. So, but that is just one of the mistakes he made.
Thank you, John. And finally?
Yeah, just a couple of points to reflect what John said, that anything that's such an intensive record of cultural heritage is whether it's entirely accurate or not, is a really useful document to be able to look back from that vantage point, because it's also reflective of the kind of productive values of the time in terms of how it's written, and also what Sharon said in terms of the description of some land being bog and some land being waste. And now, of course, we're completely re-evaluating that very 19th century idea of productivity as being a great benefit. And what it kind of reminds me of in a contemporary context is the new UNESCO National Park in the northeast of Scotland is a massive great bog in flow country. So we really are re-evaluating the value and meaning of land in a very different way from the memoirs and the Ordnance Survey.
Thank you. Does anybody in the audience wish to ask the panel a question before we finish off? Okay. Okay, all that's left for me to do is to thank the panel for your very frank answers. Some of them have sprung them on you, like with the memoirs. It's very handy, the memoirs in front of you. But so thanks very much for your answers, indeed. Yeah. Okay, folks, thank you all for your attendance. And finally, I want to thank Martha and Rebecca and other members of the team of Artlink for this excellent event. We're very happy that it has taken place here in Donegal. Thank you, Martha. Okay, safe. Enjoy the next event. Thank you.